It's one of those memories that has crystallized itself in my brain as a series of fragments. I remember Hortense's delighted giggle as she threw herself at Cinderella. I remember Mr. Fitzwilliam's eyes growing wide and round with horror. I remember Cinderella's smile expanding over her face, exposing white and even teeth, and the mischievous glint I'd seen earlier turn into something sharper, more focused. Mostly, though, I remember the cry of my little sister as she jerked back from making contact with Cinderella, cradling her hand in front of her. Fat drops of blood slid down Hortense's hand to her wrist. I saw the crescent-shaped impression of teeth marks on the side of her hand, just below her pinky finger. We all stood there in shock, watching the blood trickle down her wrist. None of us moved. I think it was just too much for us to process. The shock was broken when Hortense began to sob, and Mother rushed to her side, already whipping a handkerchief out of her pocket to wrap around the wound. What was wrong with Hortense? I remember being confused as to what had happened, even though I had just seen Cinderella reach out and bite my sister. But my brain refused to entertain the idea that the girl I was now supposed to call sister had reached out and bitten Hortense. Then I saw Cinderella's face. Her eyes held the same focused sharpness as before, and below that was her mouth, smeared with blood from my little sister's hand. Cinderella saw me looking, and she winked at me, sucking the blood from her lips before it could roll down and mar her starched white dress. Mr. Fitzwilliam stepped in front of me, breaking Cinderella's eye contact with me and blocking my view of her entirely. Before I could fully process what I had seen, he had bundled Cinderella back into the strange carriage they'd come in, and was snapping at his footmen to draw them up to the back of the house. I watched them go with a feeling of shock. In all of the worst-case scenarios that I'd imagined for this moment, never had I imagined a scenario involving blood. Mr. Carlton scooped up Hortense, who was sobbing, huge fat tears rolling down her face, and hurried toward the house, Mother following close behind. Hortense was a small, limp figure in Mr. Carlton's arms, and the sight of her scared me. I stood in the dust in front of my house, alone, staring at the spot on the ground where a few drops of Hortense's blood had mixed with the brown dirt. I couldn't stay there, with the blood so near and so fresh, the metallic scent of it still clinging to my nostrils. I gathered up my skirts and headed right back to my tree. I wanted the solitude and the solidity that came from being up in the crook of my tree, high above everyone else. At least, it had seemed high above everyone else when I was 11. Besides, I had already ruined my stockings. What further damage could I do? I climbed up the solid trunk, my feet sure on the worn ladder, and curled into the same ball that Mother had found me in earlier.